Thank you, Russ. Thank you all for that song service. Just tell you what, if you're not cranked up, it's your own fault. I'll tell you, looking at the things that we have lined out to teach in the next, as long as I'm given, it strikes me that the Lord had an awful lot to do in the 3 years of his ministry. When you take the men that he chose and decided to go with him in his ministry, the things that he had to change their minds on, the ways that he had to alter their thinking, the convincing that he had to do that he was indeed the Christ, the Son of God. It's amazing that they did not pick up some of the things that we sang that song, and I left my book back there. I wanted to look at something here in one of the songs that we had. Master, the tempest is raging. This is the wrong one. What number was that? Master, the tempest is raging. 189. Yeah. Master, the tempest is raging. You know, when you start out not believing in something, you don't have a clue about it. You're not, that doesn't occupy your thoughts. It doesn't make you stop and ponder anything. But when you see something that just all of a sudden makes you go, whoa, and you start thinking about that. This song really struck me as I was trying to figure out how those people reacted on the day of Pentecost. You know, the ones that heard the sound of a rushing wind, and they saw the tongues like fire, and they heard the apostles speaking in languages that they had never learned. I want to read this song, and I want us to think about what happened with the disciples first and how much went on before that day of Pentecost. I want you to listen to this. Master, the tempest is raging. You know when this song is written about, what it's about? When they were in the boat and the waves were just about to turn them over, and the Lord was up in the bow, asleep. He's taking a snooze while they're about to be turned over. It says, the billows are tossing high. The sky is overshadowed with blackness, and no shelter or help is nigh. The Sea of Galilee was, it's a lake. But when the winds came through there, it could build up to where it could capsize a boat. It says, carest thou not that we perish? How canst thou lie asleep? Master, with anguish of spirit I bow in my grief today. The depths of my sad heart are troubled. Awaken and save, I pray. Torrents of sin and of anguish sweep o'er my sinking soul. And I perish, dear Master. Oh, hasten and take control. I skipped one line of that first verse. It's, when each moment so madly is threatening a grave in the angry deep. If you could picture what it was like for those men to be in that boat and to have him lying up there asleep when they were, I've been in some rough water. And that's not the time to be sleeping. If you can sleep in that, you've got some peace of mind that goes way past anything I've got. Master, the terror is over. The elements sweetly rest. Now we go from this tumult and the waves about to capsize the boat to now everything is calm. What was it that happened there? It says, earth's sun in the calm lake is mirrored, and heaven's within my breast. Linger, O blessed Redeemer, leave me alone no more. And with joy I shall make the blessed harbor and rest on the peaceful shore. The winds and the waves obey thy will. peace, be still. Whether the wrath of the storm-tossed sea or demons or men or whatever it be, no water can swallow the ship where lies the master of ocean and earth and skies. They all shall sweetly obey thy will. Peace, be still. Peace, be still. When he did that, when he said, be still, and everything just calmed right down. I don't know about you, but that would have captured my attention. That would have been one of those moments where I would have, from that moment on, based everything that I think on that event right there. With them, some of them did and some of them didn't. The winds and the waves shall obey thy will. Peace, be still. On the day of Pentecost, those men had seen enough that they were convinced. There was no question in their minds. The rest of the people, though, the rest of the people were fully convinced that on that day that he was crucified, they had put to death someone who stepped way out of bounds by claiming to be the Son of God. He deserved to die. Nobody does that. Crucify him, they said. And they felt good about that. They felt good about putting that man to death because nobody makes those claims. They evidently had not seen or had not heard or had not paid attention to him calming the seas. Of course, there was only the 12 there then. But where were they when he had raised Lazarus from the dead? That was an act of creation. Lazarus was sick. Lazarus was dying. His sister sent to Jesus and said, the one you love, Lord, he's dying. The Lord said, I'll be there. He waited 4 days. Waited 4 days so that nobody who saw what happened could deny anything but that he was indeed from God. Because once you die in the Mideastern sun, it doesn't take long for nature to take its course. It doesn't take long. They said, Lord, don't go in there. It stinks. But that's why he waited 4 days. So that the stench would testify to who he was. So that when he did raise him from the dead, nobody could deny the power that was behind that. It couldn't be him as a man. It had to be from God. Nicodemus knew that. Nicodemus said, Lord, we know that you come from God as a teacher. Because nobody can do these signs that you do unless God is with him. That starts with the very first miracle in John chapter 2. When the Lord took 180 gallons of water and turned it to wine. Nobody can do that. Nobody can do that. That is an act of creation every bit as much as saying, let there be. And there was. So all of these events stacked upon one another gave those men in that boat the confidence to do what they did on the day of Pentecost. But not everybody had seen all those things. Not everybody had paid attention. There had been all the usual things. Well, he's doing it by the power of... There were all kinds of reasons why people would not believe in Jesus. So they said, crucify him. But then on the day of Pentecost, something happened. First of all, there's this noise like a violent rushing wind. And it got everybody's attention. And there's these tongues like fire that came down and rested on each one of the apostles. And then these 11 men, 12 men, because they added another to Judas's spot. These 12 men were standing there and they were speaking to the crowds. And when they were speaking, the people were hearing them in their own language to which they were born. 17 different, if I counted it right, 17 different languages. And the people were hearing them speak in those languages. So something is up. Something's up. You notice how they're called three things. They're called miracles, signs, and wonders. Actually, they're miracles that cause the wonder. Because the first thing that happened there on the day of Pentecost was these people said, "What? Huh? What could this mean? How can this happen? Aren't these all Galileans?" They knew that this couldn't happen. So it made them wonder. These miracles, things that cannot happen by the hands of men, were happening. So it made them wonder what is going on. And then Peter started preaching. He preached a 4-point gospel sermon. He says Jesus was a man approved of God. You know it. He performed miracles in your midst. They all knew that. They had all heard that. They had all either heard it or seen it, or nobody in Jerusalem was ignorant to the name Jesus of Nazareth. So now, Peter says, "And you killed him." Now, right up until this moment, they had been proud of that. They had been absolutely proud of the fact that they had killed that man named Jesus of Nazareth. But now, these miracles, how are they going to explain this? What are they going to do? They didn't see him in the boat. They didn't see him or hear him say, "Be still," and the winds just calm right down. But they're seeing this. And they heard about Lazarus. And they heard about the water and the wine. They heard about all these things, but they had rejected those thoughts before. Now, though, they're faced with, I'm seeing this right in front of me. Right in front of me, I'm seeing this. What am I going to do with this? Peter says, "You killed him." Yeah, we did. And God raised him. A fact of which we, these 12 here that are doing these things from God, we're witnesses of that. And he's exalted to the right hand of God. And he uses Scripture and their witness to prove that. So now, all those people, thousands of them, I don't know how many there were, but there were more than 3,000, because some of those people were still saying, they're drunk. They're just drunk. You know the problem with that? Here are these men speaking, and the people are hearing in 17 different languages at the same time. And I'm thinking a drunk can't even speak in his own language. That's one of the first things that they do. Not that I would know, but one of the first things they do when they stop you is they want you to talk. Want to hear how you use your language. If you can't speak without slurring, I'd have to take these teeth out. Makes you slur. You start slurring when they stop you for drunk driving, you're going to jail. These men are making judgments about where this came from. They're drunk. Well, most of them, 3,000 of them anyway, recognized what was happening here. They recognized that they were on the wrong side from God. They recognized that these things cannot be done unless God is with them. And yet I'm seeing it right here in front of my face. So now they're faced with a decision. How do we look at what we did? When Peter says, "You killed him and God raised him and he's exalted to the right hand of God," he is now on the throne of David as promised to David. Excuse me. All these people realized what had happened. So in verse 37, they ask a question. The question itself tells you something. They said, "Men and brethren, what should we do?" I'm adding the near tears, but I can guarantee it was there. That when they realized that this was not a blasphemer, this was indeed the Messiah that they've been waiting for all of their history as Jewish people, they knew they were on the wrong side of God. That is what happens. That's what happened to them. It's what happened to me. It's what happens to anybody who's going their own way, and then they realize, I'm opposite of God. I am opposed to everything God stands for. I need to get right with God. What do you do then? I remember as a kid, I had some cousins that were, you're going to have to erase this one, Jake. I had some cousins that were a little obstinate, and every time they did something wrong, their mom would say, "You say I'm sorry." I said, say I'm sorry. I'm going to smack you if you don't say I'm sorry. That's what she got. All right, okay, we're done. Somehow that never seemed to fit with me. That tone of voice and that look and that did not mean I'm sorry. You know, I know that our history, the history of our country, is something that we can learn by. You know, back in the early days, there wasn't much law around. Law was something that it took a while for it to settle in. So we have what we call the wild, wild west, where everybody wore a gun and everybody did what was right in their own eyes, and it got sorted out in the end. Well, in the process of that, a lot of people suffered, a lot of people died, a lot of things did not go well. So little by little, law was enforced. Law became implemented, little at a time. And it was pretty severe in the beginning because there were a lot of hanging judges, and you'd get hung for stealing a horse. As a matter of fact, one of my best friends over in Washington, name is Randy Bass. His father was Al Bass. He was a preacher in that area. From Montana. The Bass family from Montana. As a matter of fact, they kidded about it, but it was true. That they're from the same family of Sam Bass, the horse thief that was hung in Montana. They hung you for stuff like that. And it didn't matter whether you're sorry about it or not. If you did it, you're going to hang. And that went on until the more gentle of society began to gain control, and they started incarcerating people and rehabilitating people instead of executing them for every crime that took place. But there's one thing that everybody in every situation required of someone before they could be rehabilitated or released or paroled or anything like that, and that is some sign that the people were sorry for what they had done. Remorse. Remorse was required before mercy could be implemented. You know, that's exactly the way the gospel is. Remorse is required. Being sorry for what we've done is required. And it's not one of these, I'm sorry. It's a heartfelt, down to the bone regret that we've done what we did. Daniel is a good case, and we had Russ. Your name escaped me for a minute there, buddy. I don't know how I can forget your name. Russ read for us from Daniel chapter 9. I want to go back there and I want to look at something here, and we'll close this out in just a few minutes here. In verse 5, let's back up to verse 4. He says, I prayed to the Lord my God and confessed. I don't know whether you know the story of Daniel or not, but Daniel was a unique individual. Daniel was from the royal family. He was one of the princes. He was one of the sons of David who could take the throne if everybody else, he was long down the line, but he could have taken the throne if everybody else was gone. So when Nebuchadnezzar came and captured Jerusalem, he took these young princes, of which Daniel was one, and Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah were three more. And he had them live in his palace, and he educated them according to the ways of the Babylonians, and he used them to help govern those people that he had taken into captivity. A very responsible position. Daniel was a man of integrity. Integrity scarcely seen. This man was one whom Gabriel came and said, straight from the throne of God, O highly respected man. Wow. For that to be said about Daniel from God to this world means a lot about this man. But I want you to notice how this man, years and years later, how he reacts when he realizes the time for their persecution or their captivity. According to Jeremiah anyway, he was reading Jeremiah. Jeremiah said 70 years is when they're going to be released. He's reading Jeremiah and he realizes, oh, the time's up. So he starts praying, and here's what he prays, beginning in verse 4. I prayed to the Lord my God and confessed and said, alas, O Lord, the great and awesome God, who keeps his covenant and loving kindness for those who love him and keep his commandments. We have sinned. This is something that I've always been conscious of. I have trained with preachers who use you a lot. You better. You have done. You do this. And I hope that never comes out of my mouth. Here's a lesson for us. That regardless of where we are in the picture, we are guilty. All have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. So there's no point, no place at which any individual can stand up and say, you. Just you. It's always we. We have sinned, committed iniquity, acted wickedly, rebelled, even turning aside from your commandments and your ordinances. Moreover, we have not listened to your servants, the prophets, who spoke in your name to our kings, our princes, our fathers, and all the people of the land. Righteousness belongs to you. You know, God has the right to just wipe us out and start over. Because all of us have sinned. So anything less than that is mercy. Anything less than that is grace. Anything that gives us an opportunity to turn around and come back is merciful, is graceful in God's sight. He says, righteousness belongs to you, but to us, O Lord, open shame. Here's probably the best man on the earth at the time. And he says, open shame belongs right here. That's the way we should react. That, folks, is the remorse that this righteous man felt that caused God to stop their persecution right here and send them back. We read on a little bit further, and it says that from the moment Daniel started praying, from the moment he opened his mouth, when he said, "O Lord, we have sinned," from that moment, the decree was issued, and the people of God were on their way back because of the remorse of a man who had not committed the iniquity. Remorse is something we can all feel. Sorrow for sin is something we can all feel. It can motivate every last one of us to do the right thing. When we recognize the price that guilt and sin bring upon God's people, I don't have to have committed something myself to feel the pain that we all feel when a brother is in that situation. Paul, the great apostle, writes in 2 Corinthians chapter 11, "Who is weak without my being weak? Who is in sin without my intense concern?" He's talking about remorse that we all feel for each other's sins, which causes a lot of other things to take place. Our activity to help save someone from that. Our teaching to help prevent those kind of things. All of that is something that motivates us to do the right thing. This remorse that we feel, not just at our own sin, but also the sins of others. You know, we've been praying a lot about our nation, for our nation. A lot of things going wrong in our country. A lot of the things that are right being called wrong, wrong being called right. Just the turning upside down of what for centuries has been right and wrong is disturbing. It's terribly disturbing. And sometimes I get the feeling, here's what I feel. I didn't do that. I'm not guilty of that. It's not my fault. That nation's going to hell in a handbasket, and I didn't do it. But I want you to think about something. If we go quietly into the night while it is being done, we did it.
Amen. That's right.
If we don't stand for right, we're sitting for wrong. There is something to be learned by Daniel, because Daniel, in all of his captivity, always did the right thing, always stood for the right thing. There is such a thing as contributory negligence. I learned that in insurance because I did something that contributed to an accident. I wasn't the one that did it, but I contributed in some. I'm still trying to figure out how it was I contributed to the negligence, but I had to pay my share because I wasn't completely innocent. Daniel was about as innocent as you can get in his situation, but Daniel was praying as though the whole thing was on his shoulders. And that's the way we should be. That's the way the Lord was. Because when the Lord went to the cross, he was not guilty, but he took every bit of that guilt on himself for us. That's what we should be willing to do for each other. Folks, when the Lord Jesus says, "Blessed are those who mourn," that's what he's talking about. He's not talking about just being a whiner. He's talking about recognizing the price that sin and wickedness causes in the lives of people, that causes in the church, that it causes in the nation. And the worse it gets, the more the penalty is going to be to pay. So let's do our best to put the brakes on and do the right thing in the face of whatever opposition comes our way. I'm really glad that I got my children raised in the generation I did, because I'd be in jail now probably. Because if my kids need a whooping, they're going to get a whooping. If my kids need to be corrected in front of everybody, they're going to be corrected in front of everybody. I may go to jail. I'm just so glad that my job there's over, that I don't have that job anymore. Because it's going to get worse before it gets better. If you're subject this morning to the gospel call, if you know that you need to show remorse for the life that you've lived, that's not something that is painful. It's a release. It gives us peace. The peace which passes understanding. If you are subject to the gospel call, come while we stand and sing the song that Mel has announced.